Her scream broke the silence of the saloon. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of sound that made men stop drinking for a second, just to stare. Evelyn Grace knelt on the dusty wooden floor. Her wrists were tied. Blood and dirt mixed on her skin. The shirt she wore was torn and hanging from her shoulders, barely covering her trembling body. Every inch of her body told a story. Bruises dark as plum on her hips, dried blood on her knees, a cut still bleeding near her temple. She looked 19, but her eyes had already lived a lifetime of fear. The crowd watched her like a pack of wolves. Whiskey, sweat, and hunger filled the air. The owner of the Silver Spur Saloon, Silas Crowder, grinned as he slammed his hand on the table. $30 to start, his voice echoed against the walls. This one's pure, never been touched. Fresh as spring rain. Laughter roared. Coins clinked. A man shouted, 40. Another raised to 50. Evelyn tried to cover herself, but the rope cut deeper into her wrist. Her breath trembled. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Crowder walked behind her, fingers grazing the back of her neck. Don't look so scared, girl, he whispered. You'll make some man real happy tonight. The crowd howled again. To them, this wasn't cruelty. It was entertainment. Evelyn bit her lip until blood ran down her chin. She looked up, eyes darting across the sea of faces, searching for one kind soul. There was none. Only men who saw her as a body, a thing. Then a new voice broke through the noise, low, gravelly. $75. The room froze. Heads turned toward the door. A tall man stood there. Sunburned skin, dust on his boots, a calmness that didn't fit the chaos. His name was Jonas Whitaker, a rancher from 10 miles out, known to live alone since his wife died years ago. He'd just sold a herd of cattle last week, pocketing more cash than he'd seen in years, enough to fix up his ranch or maybe to right a wrong that had haunted him since losing his family to bandits long ago. Crowder blinked. 75. You sure about that? Old man? Jonas nodded once. Cash money. The room erupted again, half laughing, half shocked. No one outbid him. Crowder grabbed the money, grinning wide. She's all yours. Jonas walked forward, slow and deliberate. He untied her wrists himself. Then without a word, he took off his coat and draped it around her shaking shoulders. Her eyes met his for a moment. There was something in them he hadn't seen in years, something like trust, though fragile as glass. Outside, the wind blew dust across the empty street. Evelyn staggered beside him, half in shock, half afraid this was just another trick. And maybe it was, because in Millfield, Kansas, nothing good ever came without a price. But why would a lonely old rancher spend every dollar he had to buy a broken girl he didn't even know? The ride out of town was quiet. Too quiet. The wind kicked up dust across the empty road. Evelyn sat behind Jonas on the horse, her arms barely touching his back. She kept her eyes on the horizon, afraid to look at him, afraid of what might happen once they reached his ranch. After a few miles, Jonas slowed the horse near a cluster of oak trees along the ridge, their sturdy trunks casting long shadows over the parched grass. Time to rest, he said. He climbed down and untied the canteen. Evelyn hesitated but followed, her bare feet touching the hot dirt. Jonas poured some water into the tin cup and handed it to her. Drink, he said simply. Her lips were cracked, her throat dry. She took a sip, but her eyes never left his face. Then suddenly she swung the cup at him, water splashing across his shirt. Jonas stepped back, startled. Evelyn turned and bolted toward the brush, stumbling as she ran. Hey, Jonas called, not angry, just firm. You run out there, you won't last a mile in this heat. She spun around, shaking. You think I'm stupid? You paid for me. You think I don't know what comes next? Her voice broke halfway through the sentence. Jonas sighed, wiped his face with his sleeve, and spoke low. I ain't like them men in that saloon, now girl. You don't have to run from me. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Sweat and tears streaked her dusty face. Jonas pointed to the canteen, still half full. Suit yourself, but you'll need this more than I do. He tossed it toward her feet and started walking back to the horse. Evelyn stood frozen, heart racing. The heat pressed on her like a weight. After a few steps, she turned, picked up the canteen, and followed him back. But even as she walked behind him, her mind raced with doubts. Men like him always had a price, didn't they? She'd keep her guard up, watch for the first sign of betrayal. She didn't say thank you, but the way she held the water close said enough. By the time they reached his ranch, the sun was sinking behind the ridge. The small wooden house stood quiet against the fading sky. Jonas helped her down, steady but gentle. Sit there. I'll get you some water. She sat on the porch, body aching, watching him move around the yard like a man used to silence. He came back with a clean shirt and a tin cup. Put this on, he said. You look like you've been through hell. She took the shirt, but changed behind the barn, peeking out every few seconds to make sure he wasn't watching. Trust didn't come easy after what she'd endured. Her voice trembled. You paid for me. Now do it. Jonas froze. No, he said quietly. I didn't buy you. I bought your freedom. She looked at him, eyes wide, unsure what to believe. The desert wind carried the last bit of sunlight across the land, and somewhere deep inside she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, not all men were the same. The next morning came soft and quiet, the kind of morning that tricks you into thinking the world's a gentle place. Jonas was fixing the fence while Evelyn tried to help, though her hands still trembled when she held the hammer. She'd slept in a bed for the first time in months, and had eaten till she was full. But peace felt strange, like wearing someone else's coat. It didn't quite fit. Jonas glanced at her from time to time, not saying much. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he did speak, his voice carried weight. You keep working. You'll earn that breakfast. Evelyn smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her. By afternoon, the heat settled over the land like a heavy blanket. Cicadas screamed from the trees. The air shimmered above the dry grass. Jonas filled the water trough while Evelyn gathered wood for the stove. For a few hours, it almost felt normal. But peace never lasted long in the West, back in town. Clayton Boone was sitting in the saloon, his pride bleeding worse than his wallet. Men laughed about the old rancher who outbid him. He slammed his glass down. That bastard took what's mine, he growled. When his two hired hands nodded, he stood. Mount up. We're paying him a visit. By sunset, Jonas felt the wind shift, the kind of silence that comes before trouble. His horse twitched, ears forward. Evelyn was inside, washing dishes, humming a tune so faint it barely reached the porch. Jonas stepped outside, eyes scanning the hills. A thin line of dust rose against the orange sky. Riders. He loaded his old rifle, calm as ever. Evelyn noticed his face change and came to the door. What is it? Are they coming? Jonas nodded slowly. Stay inside. To lock the door. Don't open it unless you hear my voice. She wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped her cold. The sound of hooves grew louder, 3 shadows against the dying light. Clayton Boone had found them. He dismounted, boots crunching on dried dirt. Evening, old man. He called. Figured we had unfinished business. Jonas stood tall, rifle resting easy in his hands. The quiet between them was sharp enough to cut. Inside. Evelyn pressed her back to the wall, heart racing. She had been owned, beaten, sold, and saved. But maybe the real test of her freedom was just beginning. If you've been listening this far, take a slow sip of your coffee or tea and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. And if you want to know how this standoff ends, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Because sometimes, in the Wild West, surviving the night was the hardest part of all. The air was still, the kind of still that made your skin crawl. Jonas stood by the fence, rifle in his hands. Across the yard, Clayton Boone smirked under his hat, the kind of smile that came from a man who thought he'd already won. Behind him, 2 riders waited, hands near their guns, eyes sharp. Evening, Whitaker. Clayton called out, You got something that belongs to me? Jonas kept his voice calm. I don't reckon I do. Clayton stepped closer, spurs jingling. You think buying her at that auction makes you a hero? You ain't no hero. You're just an old fool with money to waste. Bet. He spat in the dirt. Now hand her over before someone gets hurt. Inside the house, Evelyn peeked through the curtain. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to run, but something in her refused to hide anymore. She'd been running all her life, and she was tired of it. Jonas lifted his rifle slightly. She ain't yours. She ain't mine either. She's her own person. You best ride back before you make a mistake you can't undo. Clayton's grin faded. That girl owes me. She looked me dead in the eye when they called my name. Jonas shook his head. She didn't owe you a damn thing. The tension cracked like thunder. One of Clayton's men moved his hand too fast. Jonas fired. The shot echoed off the hills. The bullet tore a furrow across his shoulder. And his hat flew off as he stumbled back, his gun clattering to the dirt. Clayton's smile turned into rage. He drew his revolver and fired. Jonas dropped behind the water trough, the bullet splintering the wood inches from his head. Evelyn screamed and ducked behind the door frame. "Stay down!" Jonas shouted, reloading. He fired again, the second bullet grazing Clayton's sleeve, tearing the fabric. The two hired hands panicked. One turned his horse and bolted. The other froze, eyes wide. Clayton cursed. "You just made a mistake, old man." "You can't shoot your way out of this." Jonas stood, steady as stone. "Maybe not, but I can sure try." For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Evelyn did something no one expected. She stepped out onto the porch, holding Jonas's revolver with both hands. Her voice shook, but her aim didn't. "Leave us alone." "You had your chance." Clayton's eyes widened. He wasn't used to being the one afraid. He took one slow step back, jaw tight. "This ain't over," he hissed. Then he turned his horse and rode off, kicking up dust as he disappeared into the fading light. Jonas knew better than to relax. The sheriff might come sniffing around soon, asking about the shots fired, and Clayton's type didn't forget a grudge. He'd likely rally more men next time. Evelyn lowered the gun, her hands trembling. The hired hand Jonas had shot lay groaning in the dirt, clutching his shoulder, not dead, but bleeding bad enough to need a doctor. Jonas dragged him to his horse and sent him off with a warning. "Tell your boss this ends here, or next time it won't." Jonas looked at her, half proud, half terrified of what almost happened. She met his eyes and whispered, "He'll come back, won't he?" Jonas glanced toward the road, the sky bleeding orange above the hills. "Oh, he'll come back." The real question was when. The night came quiet after the storm. The gunpowder smell still hung in the air. Jonas fixed the broken fence post while Evelyn picked up the empty shells near the porch. Neither said a word. Sometimes silence was the only way two people could breathe again. The stars came out one by one, soft and endless. Jonas sat on the porch steps, his arm bandaged where a bullet had grazed him. Evelyn brought him a cup of coffee, her hands still shaking. He took it, nodding his thanks. "You did good out there," he said softly. She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I was scared." "Only fools ain't," he replied. Then after a long pause, he added, "But fear's what tells you you're still alive." Evelyn sat beside him. The night air smelled of dust and pine. For the first time, she didn't feel small, didn't feel owned. She felt strong. A coyote howled in the distance. Jonas chuckled. "Guess word's out. We made it through another day." Evelyn smiled, a quiet one, but real. She looked at him and said, "You could have let me go that first night. Why didn't you?" Jonas stared at the horizon where the moon touched the hills. "Maybe I saw someone worth saving," he said. "Maybe I just didn't want to die knowing I never did the right thing when I had the chance." The wind picked up, cool and calm now. She reached over, touched his hand gently, and in that small moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not pity, not debt. Something quieter, stronger, something that might one day grow into Kiev. Weeks turned into months. The land healed. So did they. It wasn't easy. Nights when Evelyn woke screaming from nightmares, or days when Jonas stared at the horizon, remembering his lost wife. But little by little, through shared chores and quiet talks under the porch lantern, they built something real. Evelyn helped rebuild the ranch, and Jonas learned how to laugh again. He never called her a debt. He called her hope. And that made all the difference. Sometimes life out here was cruel, but sometimes it gave second chances to those brave enough to take them. And maybe that's the lesson we all forget too often. That courage isn't just drawing a gun. It's getting back up when the world keeps knocking you down. It's choosing kindness when anger would be easier. Now, let me ask you something. If you were Jonas, would you have risked everything to protect a stranger? Or would you have walked away to save yourself? Think about it for a moment. And if this story moved you even a little, give it a like. It helps more people hear stories like this one. And if you love tales of courage, redemption, and the Wild West, hit that subscribe button, pull up a chair, pour yourself some coffee, and stay a while. Because out here, in the quiet places of the world, stories like this still matter. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remind us who we're meant to be.